The envelope sat on the kitchen counter, untouched, staring at me as though it had a life of its own. The address on the front was unmistakable. It was from him, Alex, my ex-boyfriend. It had been nearly 2 years since we last spoke, and in all that time, I had never once wondered what he was up to. We had both moved on in our own ways, or at least that's what I'd convinced myself of. But now, seeing his name in bold letters across the front of the envelope, I felt a strange knot twist in my stomach. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and weighed it for a moment. It wasn't heavy. Nothing about it screamed urgency or importance. It was just an ordinary wedding invitation. But in the back of my mind, I knew it wasn't just an invitation. It was a statement. Alex had always been the type to make grand gestures, even when he didn't need to. Our relationship had been full of those. Over-the-top birthday surprises, spontaneous trips, and extravagant gifts. He was the kind of person who needed to feel like the center of attention, and his charm was undeniable. He'd always been good at getting people to look at him, to admire him, but that wasn't what bothered me anymore. It was the fact that, after everything, I hadn't expected to hear from him again. It had been over 2 years since we broke up, but those 2 years had felt like an eternity. Our relationship had ended suddenly, one of those breakups that neither person saw coming, even though, looking back, it should have been obvious to both of us. We were just different people. We had grown apart, and while he might have been okay with the split, I wasn't. I spent months questioning myself, wondering what I had done wrong, wondering what he had found in someone else that I couldn't give him. It wasn't just the breakup that hurt. It was the aftermath, the silence, the fact that he had moved on, seemingly without a second thought, while I was left picking up the pieces of my life. I opened the envelope, the card inside almost too pristine, too perfect. The heavy cardstock, the elegant typeface, everything about it screamed money. My ex had always been drawn to the finer things in life, the luxuries and the status that came with them. He had always wanted more success, more attention, more admiration. And now, it seemed, he had found exactly what he was looking for. The invitation was addressed not just to me, but to me and a +1, as though he had thought I might need someone to accompany me on this little trip down memory lane. His fiancée, apparently, was the daughter of some wealthy tech mogul, or so I had heard through mutual friends. The name on the card was unfamiliar to me, but that was irrelevant. The fact that he was getting married wasn't what mattered. It was the invitation itself. Alex had invited me to his wedding, and I couldn't help but wonder why. The message was brief and to the point, but there was an undertone to it, an unspoken sense of superiority. It was clear that he wasn't just inviting me to celebrate with him. He was inviting me to witness something, to witness his success, to see him with his beautiful, rich fiancée, and to marvel at how far he'd come since we had parted ways. It was as if he wanted me to know, to really understand that he was doing better without me, that his life had gotten better the moment I left it. I held the card in my hands for a few seconds longer before setting it down on the counter. I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't know why he would reach out to me after all this time, after all the silence. Was he trying to get closure? Was this some kind of twisted victory lap? I tried to remind myself that I didn't care, that I was over him, that I had moved on. And yet, the invitation nagged at me. It wasn't so much about the wedding itself, but about the principle of it. Why did he want me there? Was I supposed to feel jealous? Was I supposed to feel regret? The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like a game, and Alex had always been good at playing games. I looked over at the calendar on the wall. The wedding was in a few weeks. That gave me just enough time to decide whether or not I would go. I thought about it for a while, pacing the kitchen, then sitting down at the table. I didn't owe him anything. We weren't friends, and we hadn't been in years. The fact that he had reached out to me now, so suddenly, felt off. But something inside me couldn't help but wonder what the event would be like. What had his life become? What had he become? Was he still the charming, confident man I had known? Or was he just another version of the person who had broken my heart? I spent the next few hours wrestling with the idea, turning it over and over in my mind. I wasn't really doing this for him. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing how much I'd moved on. Or hadn't. No, I was doing this for me. I wanted to see it. I wanted to know what he was trying to show off. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was something else. But something deep down told me that I needed to see it for myself. It would be my closure, my moment of peace. It would let me know that I was better off without him and that his new life wouldn't change the fact that I had built a life of my own. But I also knew that if I went, I wouldn't go alone. If I was going to make an appearance at his wedding, I needed to do it with someone by my side, someone who could keep me grounded, someone who could make the whole thing less awkward. Tom. Tom had been one of my closest friends for years. He had been there for me during the hardest parts of my breakup with Alex, helping me pick up the pieces when I was at my lowest. And he was the perfect person to bring along. He wasn't the type to make a scene, but he had this effortless charisma about him that seemed to draw people in. He was charming in the most natural way possible. I wasn't sure how much I wanted to rely on that, but I knew that having him there would make things a lot easier. At least I hoped it would. I sent him a quick text, asking if he would come with me to a wedding. He didn't ask too many questions, just agreed immediately. I knew I could count on him. We had that kind of friendship. No judgments, no expectations. Just two people who understood each other. The days leading up to the wedding were filled with the usual stress that came with preparing for any big event. I had to pick out something to wear, find the right balance between looking appropriate and feeling comfortable. I didn't want to look too good, didn't want to give Alex the satisfaction of thinking I was still hung up on him, but I didn't want to look like I didn't care either. It was a fine line, one that I had to walk carefully. The night before the wedding, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The invitation sat on my dresser, a reminder of everything that had led up to this moment. I didn't know what to expect when I walked into that room. Would Alex even recognize me? Would he try to talk to me? What would his fiancée be like? And most importantly, would I be able to keep my composure when I saw him again? I closed my eyes and tried to push the thoughts out of my mind. Tomorrow I would see Alex again, but this time it wouldn't be for old times' sake. It would be for closure, for me, and I was ready for whatever came next. The day of the wedding arrived with a heavy sense of anticipation, an almost electric charge in the air. I woke up early, the sunlight streaming in through the blinds, casting a warm glow on the room. My mind was already buzzing with a million thoughts, none of which seemed to make sense. Why had I agreed to go? Why had I invited Tom? Was this really about closure, or was it some kind of twisted desire to see Alex again, to see if he had changed, to see if I had changed? He had desire. I couldn't answer that. I could only shake off the feeling of unease that was gnawing at me and focus on getting ready. I stepped out of bed and made my way to the closet. I needed something that would make me feel confident but not overdone. Something that would be tasteful, elegant, yet still send a subtle message. I was doing just fine without Alex. After rummaging through my options, I decided on a navy blue dress. It was simple, sleek, and flattering, hitting just above the knee with a delicate lace trim along the hem. It wasn't flashy, but it wasn't plain either. Perfect for the occasion, I thought. I paired it with nude heels, minimal jewelry, and kept my makeup natural. Just enough to accentuate my features, but not overwhelm them. My hair was styled loosely, with soft waves framing my face, just the way I liked it. Effortless yet put together. I looked at myself in the mirror and took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment I had been dreading and looking forward to in equal measure. The wedding wasn't just about Alex and his fiancée. It was about the strange and almost surreal feeling of seeing someone from your past in such a personal and intimate setting. Weddings were meant to be joyous occasions, but for me, it felt like walking into a scene I had never imagined myself in. One where I was no longer a part of the picture, but still had to witness it. Tom had arrived at my place early, looking sharp in a dark suit and tie. He looked at me with a warm, reassuring smile as I opened the door. "You look stunning," he said with genuine admiration. "How are you feeling?" I smiled back, though I could feel the knot in my stomach tightening. Nervous. A little. Weird, I admitted. I'm not sure why I'm even here. Tom gave me a knowing look, as if he understood exactly what I was going through. "Because you're stronger than him, and you're not going to let him win. I get it. But you're not alone. I've got your back." He winked at me before adding, "Besides, I have a feeling we'll have fun tonight." I laughed softly, trying to shake off the tension. "I don't know about fun, but I'll try." We drove to the venue, a luxury estate tucked away in the hills, surrounded by acres of well-maintained gardens and sprawling lawns. The air felt different there, almost as though it had been infused with the weight of wealth and privilege. The driveway leading up to the venue was lined with black cars and chauffeurs in suits, their polished vehicles gleaming in the sunlight. The main house was a massive, almost intimidating structure, with columns and sprawling terraces, a testament to old money and family legacy. It was the kind of place where the world of high society seemed to thrive, and you couldn't help but feel like you were stepping into a movie set. As we parked and made our way inside, the sounds of laughter and classical music filled the air. I felt an odd sense of detachment from everything around me, as if I were watching the wedding from the outside, unable to fully engage with what was happening. Tom and I were escorted into the grand hall, where guests were already mingling, sipping champagne and exchanging pleasantries. The room was opulent. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and towering floral arrangements that seemed to reach for the sky. Everything about it screamed money, luxury, and status. It wasn't my world. It never had been, and I knew I didn't belong here. We found our seats, tucked away in a corner near the back, where I could take in the entire scene without being directly in the spotlight. Tom sat beside me, scanning the room with the practiced ease of someone who had been to many events like this before. He wasn't fazed by the extravagance. For him, it was just another night. But for me, it was a reminder of what I had never been able to keep up with during my relationship with Alex. The ceremony began, and I felt a rush of emotions flood my chest. I hadn't expected to feel so overwhelmed by the sight of Alex standing at the altar, looking every bit the man I remembered, but somehow different. His hair was shorter than before, and there was an air of self-assuredness about him that I hadn't noticed in the past. His posture was upright, confident, as he exchanged glances with his bride-to-be. She was beautiful, of course. Tall, blonde, with porcelain skin and a dress that cost more than I could imagine. Her eyes sparkled with a kind of quiet pride, the kind that only someone born into privilege seemed to carry with them. It was surreal seeing Alex like this. In the time we had been together, I had always known that he had big dreams, but this was beyond anything I had expected. He had managed to snag a woman with wealth and status, someone who fits seamlessly into the world he had always wanted to be a part of. I couldn't help but wonder if that was the driving force behind his desire to show me this wedding, to show me that he had won, that he had everything he wanted and more. But as I looked at him, I also saw something else, a subtle tension in his jaw, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He looked happy, yes, but there was something else lurking beneath the surface. Was it doubt, regret, or was it just the weight of the moment pressing on him? I couldn't tell. All I knew was that it wasn't the same Alex I had fallen in love with. He was a man transformed by money, status, and ambition, and I wasn't sure if I liked what he had become. The ceremony proceeded without incident, and before long, Alex and his fiancée were pronounced husband and wife. The applause was deafening, a chorus of well-wishers clapping in unison. I found myself clapping too, not out of any real emotion, but because it felt like the right thing to do. The guests began to gather in the reception hall, a massive space with long tables draped in silk, candles flickering gently on the centerpieces. The sound of classical music shifted to something more modern as the evening went on, and the mood shifted with it. I tried to focus on Tom, who was making small talk with a few other guests nearby, but my mind kept drifting back to Alex and his bride. They were surrounded by people, all congratulating them, offering their best wishes, their compliments. I watched as Alex smiled, his eyes scanning the crowd. When they met mine, there was a moment of recognition. His expression faltered just for a second, before he quickly masked it with a grin. I couldn't tell if he had seen me as just another face in the crowd, or if he had actually realized I was there. Either way, it didn't matter. I wasn't here for him. I wasn't here to relive the past. As the evening wore on, I noticed that the more Alex tried to immerse himself in his new world, the more he seemed out of place. It wasn't something obvious, but there were little cracks in his otherwise polished demeanor. He laughed too loudly at jokes that didn't seem that funny. He clinked glasses with the wrong people as though trying too hard to fit in. and all the while his fiancée remained poised, serene, her every movement calculated, her smile never wavering. But then something unexpected happened. As Tom and I walked toward the bar to grab another drink, we bumped into the bride's father, a tall man with silver hair and sharp features. He shook Tom's hand, and the two of them immediately struck up a conversation about some investment he had recently made in a startup company. I stood by, listening to them exchange jargon that went right over my head, but I couldn't help but notice the way the other guests were watching them. There was something magnetic about Tom's presence. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, he just exuded confidence without effort, and it seemed to draw people in. Within minutes, the bride's father was praising him for his business acumen, and other people began to join the conversation. It was at that moment that I realized something. In the grand scheme of things, it wasn't Alex who was the focal point of this wedding anymore. It wasn't his fiancée, it was Tom. My quiet, unassuming friend had somehow become the center of attention, not by trying to steal the spotlight, but because people were genuinely fascinated by him. They were drawn to his charisma, his charm, his effortless confidence. I could see Alex from across the room, standing there, a forced smile on his face as he watched the group form around Tom. He looked uncomfortable, almost threatened. It was an odd feeling, but it was clear that the tables had shifted. This wedding, which had been designed to showcase Alex's life and success, had turned into something else entirely. It wasn't his world that people were interested in, it was Tom's. And somehow, it felt like the balance of power had shifted, and I couldn't help but wonder what Alex was feeling now. The evening continued to unfold in an unexpected way. I had come to the wedding with a certain kind of expectation, to watch Alex show off his life, to observe his picture-perfect world and silently remind myself that I was fine without him. But somewhere along the way, the narrative had shifted. It wasn't Alex's life that seemed to captivate the room. It was Tom. Tom had always been the kind of person who exuded quiet confidence. He wasn't loud or brash, but there was something magnetic about him. A calmness that made everyone around him feel at ease. He had this way of speaking that was both thoughtful and engaging, and he never came off as trying to impress anyone. He just was comfortable in his own skin, comfortable with whatever conversation was unfolding. That night, as he conversed with the bride's father and mingled with other guests, I couldn't help but notice how naturally people gravitated toward him. He wasn't drawing attention in an overt way, but it was as if his presence was magnetic, subtle but undeniable. And it wasn't just the bride's father who was intrigued. Others were starting to notice him too. I was standing to the side of the room, holding my glass of champagne and watching from a distance. I could see the way people leaned in when Tom spoke, how they smiled, laughed, and nodded, as if everything he said was worth listening to. There was a kind of quiet power in him, something Alex lacked these days. He was trying, but Tom, he didn't need to try. I felt a pang of something unfamiliar. It wasn't jealousy, at least not the kind I had expected to feel, but it was more like an odd sense of pride. Tom was a good friend, and seeing him hold the attention of the room wasn't surprising, but it was startling in its magnitude. There was a lightness to him, a lack of pretense, that made everything seem effortless. While Alex tried so hard to project this image of success and confidence, Tom simply was. He didn't need to prove anything. I caught sight of Alex from across the room. He was standing with his fiancée and a group of their friends, but his gaze kept drifting back to where Tom was talking. It wasn't subtle. He looked uncomfortable, his smile starting to falter, his eyes betraying the unease he was trying to hide. I couldn't help but feel a slight thrill of satisfaction. For all of Alex's wealth, his fiancée, and his carefully curated life, it was Tom who had become the most interesting person in the room. And it wasn't something he'd forced. It was just who he was. People were drawn to him without even realizing it. The evening carried on with a kind of subdued elegance, the music shifting from classical to something more upbeat, the guests slowly breaking away from their tables and gathering on the dance floor. I didn't feel like joining them. I was content to stay in the background, observing as I had been all night. My focus, however, had shifted. The faces of the guests were no longer as interesting. I wasn't as concerned with Alex or his bride. It was Tom who occupied my attention. I watched as he moved through the crowd with an ease that seemed so natural it was almost effortless. He was laughing with a group of guests now, his voice low but warm, the kind of voice that made people feel at ease. His presence commanded attention, not because he demanded it, but because it felt like the room simply needed him there. I glanced back at Alex, who was still keeping an eye on Tom. I couldn't help but think that this must have been the exact opposite of what he had envisioned. He had invited me to this wedding to show off his new life, his success. But what had ended up happening was that the focus had subtly shifted away from him. Tom had unwittingly become the center of attention, and Alex, for all his achievements, couldn't seem to reconcile with that. The whole thing felt almost surreal. I moved across the room, weaving my way through the groups of guests, heading toward the bar to grab another drink. My fingers lightly gripped the cool glass and I took a sip, trying to calm the slight tremble in my hands. I didn't know why I was feeling this way, this strange combination of satisfaction and something else. The night had turned into something I hadn't expected, and yet I couldn't deny that it was a welcome surprise. I had come here for closure, for some kind of catharsis, but now I was beginning to realize that what I had really needed wasn't closure at all. It was perspective. As I stood at the bar, my eyes drifted back to Tom. He was surrounded by a group of people, laughing easily, his face lit with a genuine warmth that made everyone else feel like they were the most important person in the room. I felt a tug at my chest. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't trying to stand out. But somehow, he did. The way people spoke to him, the way their eyes lit up when he responded, it was impossible to ignore. And then it hit me. For so long, I had allowed myself to think that Alex was the one who had everything. He had the wealth, the success, the lifestyle. But tonight it wasn't Alex who commanded attention. It was Tom. Tom! The longer I watched Tom, the more I realized just how much he had grown over the years. He had always been a steady, grounded presence in my life. But tonight, something had shifted. It was more than just his ease with people. It was the way he carried himself, the way he interacted with others, as though he had something valuable to offer without ever needing to ask for validation. He had always been supportive of me, but now I saw him in a different light. The fact that he wasn't intimidated by the extravagant display of wealth around us, the fact that he didn't even seem to notice the privileged air of the guests. There was something deeply admirable about that. As the evening wore on, I noticed that the crowd around Tom was growing larger. He was in the middle of a lively conversation when one of the bridesmaids, a bubbly woman with short red hair and a high-pitched laugh, approached him. She tapped him on the shoulder and leaned in close, speaking in a tone that was both playful and flirtatious. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see the way she was looking at him. The attention was unmistakable, and though it was subtle, I could sense that Alex had noticed it too. He had been watching Tom, and now, as the bridesmaid continued to engage with him, Alex's expression tightened ever so slightly. It wasn't jealousy, at least not the way I had expected. It was more like a kind of possessiveness, as if he couldn't quite reconcile the fact that someone else was now commanding the attention of the people in his world. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, watching the interaction unfold. Part of me wanted to walk away, to forget about the tension in the air, but something kept me rooted to the spot. I found myself both fascinated and amused by the way the evening was unfolding. It felt as though everything had flipped on its head. The wedding, which was supposed to be a celebration of Alex's new life, had become a stage where he was no longer the star. And then, as if on cue, the music shifted and the first slow dance of the evening began. The bride and groom took the floor, moving in perfect harmony, their eyes locked as they swayed to the rhythm. The guests watched in admiration, some even wiping away tears at the sheer romanticism of the moment. I couldn't help but glance at Alex again. His eyes were fixed on his bride, but the brief flicker of discomfort I had noticed earlier was still there, lingering just beneath the surface. His smile was wider now, but it wasn't as genuine as it had been earlier in the evening. His eyes darted between his bride and the group around Tom, trying to keep up appearances, trying to maintain the illusion of perfection. I took another sip of my drink, still watching from the corner of the room. The longer I observed, the more I realized that this night had become something entirely different from what I had expected. I had come to witness Alex's life, to see how well he had moved on. But instead, I found myself watching the shift in power, the subtle changes in the room's dynamic. Tom, without even trying, had taken center stage. He had become the focal point of the evening, and in doing so, he had upstaged everything Alex had worked so hard to construct. The disparity was palpable, and I found myself silently wondering if Alex was even aware of it. I didn't need to look at him again to know that he was feeling it. His discomfort had grown, though he hid it well, but the more I watched, the more I realized something. This night, this wedding, was no longer about him. It was about something else entirely, and in some strange way, it felt like the universe had handed me exactly what I needed, not closure, not regret, but a reminder that life moves on in ways we can't always predict. The wedding had reached its crescendo, the night winding down with the soft hum of music in the background, the laughter of guests growing quieter as the evening unfolded. It had been a night of unexpected emotions, strange moments, and an uncomfortable realization that the past I had tried so hard to bury was still lurking beneath the surface. As much as I had convinced myself that I was here to find closure, to see Alex again and move on with my life, I found myself drawn to the one person who hadn't been part of my past in the way Alex had. Tom. The room had shifted. What was once meant to be Alex's moment, a display of his new life, his success, his future, had turned into something different. Tom had, without intending to, become the center of attention, capturing the curiosity of the room with a charm that seemed to come effortlessly to him. And it wasn't lost on me how much Alex had noticed, how much he was trying to maintain control over the situation, desperately clinging to the facade he had built. But now, as the night was winding down, the light from the chandelier casting long shadows on the dance floor, I could feel the quiet tension that had built between us all, Tom, Alex, his new wife, and me, slowly beginning to simmer. It had been a long evening, and as the crowd started to thin, I found myself standing near the edge of the dance floor, leaning against a pillar. My gaze was fixed on the dwindling group of people still mingling by the bar, but I wasn't really paying attention to them. My thoughts were elsewhere, on Alex, on Tom, on everything that had brought me here. The weight of the evening was starting to catch up with me, and I felt an odd mix of relief and anxiety. Tom had stepped outside for some air after the reception, leaving me to my thoughts. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my dress, the coolness of the night air brushing my skin as I stepped onto the terrace. I saw him leaning against the railing, his back to me, looking out over the estate's gardens. He wasn't trying to be mysterious, he simply enjoyed the stillness of the moment. I walked up quietly, my heels making soft sounds on the stone, and stopped beside him. "Beautiful night," I said, my voice breaking through the silence. He turned to look at me, his expression warm and open, as it always was. "It is. I needed a little air. This place is a lot, isn't it?" He gave a half smile, glancing back at the mansion in the distance. "Feels like we're in another world." I nodded, my eyes tracing the outline of the grand estate, the fairy tale quality of it all. "Yeah. It's hard to believe something like this exists for real, isn't it? I mean, who lives like this?" "People who are good at making money and getting other people to think they're worth it," Tom replied with his usual wry humor. He paused for a moment before adding, "But I guess you're used to it. You know Alex better than anyone." I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. I thought I did. But tonight I realized I didn't know him at all. Not anymore. Tom raised an eyebrow but didn't push. He simply took a step closer to me, his eyes thoughtful. "How do you feel about that?" The question caught me off guard. I wasn't sure how to answer. I had thought I was here for closure, to finally see Alex's life and understand that he was no longer the person I once loved. But as the night wore on, it became clear that my feelings weren't as simple as I had hoped. There was still a part of me that was attached to the version of Alex I had once known. The version of him I had built up in my mind. Seeing him tonight, seeing how far he had come, how different he had become, it was all jarring. I wasn't sure how to reconcile those feelings. I guess I don't know, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was over it. But seeing him like that, with her, I don't know. It made me realize that maybe I'm not as over him as I thought. Tom was quiet for a moment, his gaze focused on the horizon as though weighing my words. It's okay not to be over someone, you know. It takes time. But you don't need to have all the answers right now. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time that evening, I saw him in a new light. Tom had always been there for me. He had been a quiet support, a solid presence, never pushing for anything, always understanding, always patient. But tonight, something about the way he was looking at me, the way his words resonated, felt different. He wasn't just my friend anymore. The boundary that had existed between us, the one I had kept so carefully in place, was starting to blur. I know, I replied, my voice faltering slightly. But sometimes I feel like I'm stuck. Like I'm not moving forward. I came here tonight expecting to leave with some kind of finality, and instead, I feel like I've come full circle. Like I'm stuck in the past again. Tom turned to face me fully now, his expression gentle but intent. You're not stuck, though. Not anymore. You're here and you're moving forward. You're doing what's right for you. There was something in the way he said it, something steady and reassuring. For a moment, it felt like he was grounding me, reminding me that this wasn't the end. It was just another step in the process. And maybe that was all I needed to hear. I wanted to say more, to tell him how much I appreciated his support, how much his presence had meant to me over the years, but the words caught in my throat because there was a shift inside me, a realization that I hadn't expected. Tom, I began, but before I could finish, he stepped closer to me, closing the space between us. His hand brushed against mine, and I felt a flutter in my chest, something warm and unexpected. My heart skipped a beat. His eyes softened, a quiet understanding passing between us. You don't have to say anything, but I'm here, always. And then, just like that, the moment shifted. The tension between us, the lingering, unspoken feelings snapped into place. I felt a rush of warmth spread through me as Tom leaned down, his lips brushing against mine. It wasn't a grand gesture, nor was it something planned. It was simple, tender. A moment of connection that felt like it had been building for a long time, even if neither of us had fully acknowledged it before. For a moment, everything else faded away. The mansion, the wedding, the chaos inside, all of it disappeared, and it was just the two of us, standing on the terrace, caught in something unexpected but real. The kiss deepened, and I realized that this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a rebound or a reflection of the past. This was something new, something different. When we finally pulled away, our faces still inches apart, I looked at him, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I never expected this, I whispered, feeling the weight of everything that had happened tonight. Tom smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. Neither did I. But sometimes the unexpected turns out to be exactly what we need. We stood there for a while longer, the silence between us no longer uncomfortable, but peaceful. The distant sounds of the wedding celebration continued to drift through the open door behind us, but none of it mattered anymore. It was just us now, and whatever happened next, we would figure it out together. When we finally re-entered the venue, the party was winding down. Most of the guests had begun to leave, and Alex and his wife were making their rounds, thanking everyone for attending. I could see the exhaustion in Alex's eyes now, the joy he had been forcing throughout the evening now slipping away. There was a certain finality in the way he looked at me, a kind of acknowledgement that we were no longer part of each other's lives in the way we once had been. But it didn't hurt. It didn't even sting. Seeing him in that moment, I realized that the weight of the past had lifted. I had come here to prove something to myself, to face the life Alex had chosen without me. And now, standing here with Tom beside me, I felt free from the shadow of the past. I was ready to move forward, to embrace whatever came next. As we left the venue, walking hand in hand toward the car, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I wasn't stuck anymore. I had moved on, just not in the way I had expected. The night had been a strange one, full of twists and turns, but in the end, I had found something unexpected, a new beginning, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace it.